Good morning and welcome to Nerd Fest. I'm Andy DeLuca.
And I'm George Dietrich, and we are with Connecta Federal Credit Union. We're proud to return as the major sponsors of Nerd Fest. So, Andy, what do you think? Do all these folks right here know about anything about Connecta?
I would venture to say probably several do. When they had a 2-week escrow over the last 30 years in Orange County, and we completed the transaction in 2 weeks, right on time.
Or even shorter. So, how about we impose a question and find out how many of you guys know anything about Connecta? Well, I got a few hands.
Very good.
Well, I'll tell you what. See, thanks to Uncle Howard Hughes back in 1940, he deposited $1 back in our credit union back then. And that's the way Hughes Aircraft Employee Federal Credit Union started back in 1940. And in 2001, Boeing and Raytheon, they bought into Hughes, and we changed our name into Connecta Federal Credit Union. So that makes us 78 years old. We should be retired by now.
Can you imagine?
Oh, man. Oh, I guess we're still working because we're doing something good for the community.
We're giving back to the community that we serve. And we are in Orange County, so we need to work. And we have children, and it's important to plan for the next generation.
Absolutely.
And real estate enables that.
Absolutely. And not only we do mortgages, but also we are full-blown a credit union. We provide IRA accounts, in case you're going to retire, CDs, checking savings, they're free. As a matter of fact, actually, our checking accounts, we pay the most in the country, 1.5%. So if you have your money somewhere else, think about it. By paying you 0.05, we pay 1.5%. Thank you.
Not for profit.
And they were not for profits. That's the way we return our money back to our clients, our members.
Members.
And we treat you as members. Because when you become a member of Connecta, well, we work for them then, that's right?
Essentially.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we work for our members. We don't get money, no. Okay, so let's move on. What do you think?
It's a wonderful life. Think about that when you think about our credit union.
Well, we're very excited today for our two brilliant speakers, Mark Leswing, blockchain entrepreneur and former chief technology officer for National Association of Realtors, and Alexander Vilkowski, composer, songwriter, lead data scientist for National Association of Realtors. Man, I thought myself I was going to start typing, 1812 all over again. We want to thank our sponsor for helping us put this event on. Thank you for our sponsors, CRMLS, Coast City Escrows, Pearl Mortgage, Escrow Options Group, and Pacific City Escrow.
Please be sure to visit their booths during lunch and enter to win some fantastic prizes. You all should have received an event program this morning, but just to recap, we are going to start with Mark Leswing, who will help break down blockchain and cryptocurrencies and why you should know about these technologies. Next up will be Alexander Vilkowski, who will focus on machine learning and the real-world possibilities that could help you do your job.
So after Mark and Alexander blow your minds out of this world with all the information, we will break for lunch. Boxed lunches will be available in the back of the room. Surf and turf, filet mignon, lobster tails, and shrimp. Well, you'll have some lunch. And then we'll have an hour to eat and visit our sponsors and see what they have. Then at 1:30 p.m., we will reconvene for a panel discussion and Q&A with our speakers. You guys can ask them the questions, and hopefully they can answer you back. If not, then it is what it is. This is also when we will take questions from the audience, so make sure to write down any questions, and you may have saved them for the end of the day. So don't ask the question right there. Wait, write it down, and then ask, because we're going to have a Q&A just at once. A couple of things before we started. Please silence all your phones. The last thing we want to do is hear a phone ring while we're getting these informations. And again, hold all your questions till the end of the day for the Q&A. Slides and video recordings of the presentation will be available on the ocar.org. That's ocar.org following today's event. Now please welcome Mark Leswing to the stage for his presentation on blockchain and real estate.
Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.
Mark?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks to the association for having me out, and thanks for the sponsorship from the vendors. As they were saying before, please visit them. These events don't happen without that kind of sponsorship, and it's really important. Well, I'll tell you, I came out all the way from Chicago to do this event, and I was hoping to meet some celebrities, in the area, out here, and I did run into one. It's actually I thought it was a movie celebrity, Freddy Krueger, but it's actually Frederick W. Krueger, not Frederick Charles Krueger from the movies, but my Frederick joke. Okay, so that's as good as they get, because we're going to talk about blockchains. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so before we talk about, that's my contacts, mark@leswing.com, very simple. Okay, so before we talk about what they are, we should talk about why they're important. But I want to set a little bit of context here about what blockchains are, and I came up with an easy way to know what they are. Okay, so now you have to know that I'm not selling anything, I don't represent any products, so I give a kind of an even playing field for what these things are, more instructional, so you can understand what these things really are, and then you become informed as you see products out there that have blockchains in them. Okay, so a blockchain to me is a very simple concept, and this is how you should memorize it. I think everybody's had a driver's license. Okay, so driver's license is a good example of a database, because as my driver's license go, of course I never changed the picture. Ooh, tough crowd. But actually you change the addresses, whatever. So that's a good example of a database, okay? Because you're changing things all the time, but you still have the single card, okay? And that's a database versus a blockchain is totally different. So that's my driver's license. This is my driving record. My wife's is about that long, but mine's, see how it changes in every event, every time I've ever been stopped, it's different? This is a blockchain. So all the events that happened as I've been driving are kept in a blockchain versus a database, a driver's license. Driver's license, driving record. So anybody that says blockchains will take over the world, not true. Anybody that says blockchains have no place, that's not true either. But it's a good analogy here. Driver's license, driving record. And if you remember that, as we start talking through these, we'll have some examples of the different kinds of applications that are possible in the real estate space. Okay, so now there's many players that are in the transaction itself. And what you have to remember is that one of the beauties of blockchains are that the information is spread out. There is no central authority. There is no central authority. Therefore, any policeman who wanted to stop me from running that red light could actually get my driving record without phoning into the station. They'd actually have it in their car. So the information's spread out. Therefore, the transaction's spread out across many people in the process. That's a key design feature of blockchains, which make them very unique. Okay, so because you have all the information all the time, it cuts out a lot of the back and forth or the rekeying of information as the transaction runs through. So I have a transaction, of course I put it in the MLS, and I have to make an application for a loan. You have the title people. Everybody's rekeying the information all the time as it comes through. Blockchains would eliminate that rekeying part and therefore make it more efficient as it runs through because all the information's there all the time. Okay, that's a key design feature also. Blockchains are verifiable and, what I love these tech terms, immutable. I'll tell you, you know why we meant tech people come up with these terms, immutable, whatever? We do it so that people keep hiring us. So we came up with cloud technology, make sure you get on their job. So you keep coming up with new technologies all the time, and you name it very scary things. But immutable means once it's written, it can't be changed. So in the case of my driver's record, that thing I did in 1995, I can't change the events. It was on this date, on this time, it was this offense. Okay, if it was a driving license, that changes. Okay, anything in a blockchain never changes. It just adds perfect events, and you can actually see exactly what happened. In the case of a real estate transaction, you could actually look exactly what happened in that transaction, every event that happened. But every transaction is a little bit different. That's okay. So there are different ways to think about information management. They don't replace databases. Databases don't negate blockchains. They're different. They can work together, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, how you can recognize these things. Now, and you have to remember also that blockchains are more than cryptocurrency. I think people think about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and these kind of things, cryptocurrencies, and gee, but should I invest in these things? What does it mean to my real estate business? They're separate things. So if you're investing in cryptocurrency, it's the same as playing the stock market. So you could buy gold, you could buy 10 sacks of wheat, or you could buy 4 Bitcoins. And the prices go up and down, and you're playing that game. That's the betting game. That's not the business game of blockchain. Keep those two separate. They don't intermingle at all, okay? It's different. So if Ethereum drops to, I think what was today, 162, it doesn't affect how they're used in the business transaction, because we'll see how that works later. Okay, they can improve property records because it never forgets. You can't change a fact that's in there. Get a little scary too if you think about the long-term effect because of non-disclosure, forgetting to disclose things that you should do. All the information about the property, if it's in a blockchain, is there. And if you start looking at it, it's something you should have seen as far as disclosures. It can reduce the cost of business because it eliminates rekeying. Okay, it has nothing to do with the value of Bitcoin or any of that. It eliminates rekeying of information. That is where the savings come. Reduces the risk of the real estate transaction because you're not going to miss anything, but it can increase the risk if you don't pay attention to it. If something should have been disclosed that you should have seen, it can provide you risk later, but all the information is there. It's a lower risk for lenders, lower risk for title people, because all the information's there, they don't miss it. If you're on the selling side, you have to pay attention in case there's something you should have disclosed. Overall, it should help you get to the table faster because of the time frame, but there is a ceiling. In other words, how fast could you get to the closing table? I believe that over time, this is 5 to 10 years, you should be able to close a transaction in the same amount of time that a homeowner would be prepared to move. It can never be faster than that. So 15, 20 days, enough to pack all the boxes and get out. Some people are predicting, it'll close in 2 days. It's like, well, they're not ready to move out. I mean, that's not realistic, right? So the time frame should come almost to the point where a homeowner could actually be ready to move. Okay, data can never be overwritten or lost. This is a problem of blockchains, not a solution. So many people talk about that's a feature, yes, but there's somewhat of a danger on this part too. There's a regulation in the European Union called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. It's actually your right to be forgotten. I think you've seen articles about this. You have the right to be forgotten on the internet and whatever. But remember, if your information's in a blockchain, the blockchain never forgets. We're going to talk about that later in this talk here, that if we're starting to use blockchains for real estate, but the laws and regulations are going to say that consumers have the right to be forgotten, how do these two things work together? Don't we have a problem? Smart contracts. Okay, this is another tech term. So we invented this term to totally bamboozle people. A smart contract is not a legal contract. Okay? People talk about it being smart contract, and people start envisioning that smart contracts will replace paper contracts. Not really. It was a catchy marketing term there, smart contract. The better analogy is to think about it as a vending machine. I walk up to the vending machine, and I see the Clark bar. That's a B2. I hit B2, and it says, enter 25 cents. I would put my coins in, and that Clark bar went down. The things on row 4, row 5 are different prices. The fact that I push the button, and it can operate the mechanism to make it fall down is the smart contract. It's a contract in that when I push this button, something will happen. That is the contract. It's not terms, remedies, and all those other kind of things that go into a real estate contract. Nothing near what you'd have in a lease on a commercial side at all. So it's just real catchy. You'll see a lot of people who write about blockchains mix those up, and they say smart contracts will replace everything. I'm going to talk about legislation and regulation later. We're seeing that the politicians now are starting to confuse the two as well. But they're not. It's a marketing term for a computer program. A smart contract is a computer program, that's all it is. When I push the button, it'll do X. So in this case, when I push the button, the lights will go down. Okay. It's a contract, yes, because the action gives me a known result. But what if I push the button and the lights didn't go down? Can I sue you for 25 days? And it doesn't have all these remedies and all these things in them. Okay, so it's better to think about it as a vending machine model. Okay, I'm pimping this. On my website, I wrote a white paper on, over the next 7 years, what kinds of applications will come out. So it doesn't promote any kind of technology, but I'll talk about the kinds of applications that'll come out. Okay, so first of all, I took a 7-year look, and I went kind of all the way through to 2025, and in my view, my opinion, what kinds of applications will come out, and then in the upper part here, what other external forces will happen at what time. So clearly, in the next 7 years, you're going to have applications come out, but right around the 2021-22 timeframe, the business folks, these are you, will go out here and start judging the vendors who have included blockchain in their applications, and you'll decide which are the winners or losers. This shakeout is going to happen. It has to happen. Blockchain technology is too new not to have a shakeout, so there will be a shakeout, and it'll be different than the shakeout we see in the rise of Bitcoin pricing, that volatility going up and down by the hour. But whole vendors will say, that's a bad application, that's a good one. So the crowd will decide right around that 21-22 time frame. Then we're going to have a period of interoperability. I'm going to talk about that for a minute. And then in about 2025, we're going to have this oversight. And when I say oversight, this is where the government's going to start getting involved with regulation and legislation to protect the consumer. Okay, so as you know, they're always working for us, right? The politicians, or no, what? Oh, okay. Hey, that one got more reaction than my tech joke at the beginning, so this is good. I know the crowd now. It's okay. I understand what's going on. But legislation will catch up and try to do the right thing for consumers. And so there's really some time here, but we'll have a shakeout first, and then they're going to start writing laws and regulation to start protecting people and guiding how business is done with this technology. Okay, so the very first application I think is going to come out, and I know it is, it's called fractional ownership. Think of it as REITs done with coins. Okay, so therefore, if you're going to have a real estate investment trust and you buy into the property, you have a certain amount of time frame I have to hold on to it, right? There's a minimum I have to do and all these kind of regulations around that. This is happening right now in India and Korea to start. It's coming to the US very quickly. I think there was an announcement that St. Regis could start doing this up in Aspen. Where you can start having fractional ownerships based upon coins. Therefore, maybe I want to buy, right in the middle of the slide there with the red slash, I'm going to buy 100 shares or 100 coins worth of this property. And of course, I get to share in the rent, same way you would in other things. So I buy this into the building. And then what's unique about it is I can then sell perhaps 15 of my shares to somebody else without ever talking to the people who own the property. So it creates its own little market around that property. So at the end, I have 85. I sold 15 to the other person. Everybody has it. But there's no minimums. There's no hold periods. That's the kind of concept here in fractional ownership. It's big and started in a big way in India because people couldn't afford housing and they needed a way to get into housing. So they started this fractional ownership thing. Then it took off into Korea next. It's actually moving now through these companies, particularly one called Consensus in New York, kind of running through this concept of fractional ownership. But think about it as REITs without minimums, without hold periods, and you have the total right to buy and sell your shares to anybody else who would buy them from you. And of course, you participate in the rent. So this one's going to happen. This is my first one of the, in my progression in the white paper. And I explain what these things are, if you want looking for a technical explanation of what these things are. Okay, the next kind of application. So you notice I'm not hawking any one type of application. These are all different kinds of ways to use blockchain. We're going to see people come up with these things called directories. In other words, I want to go to some place and have it point to all the information that's out there. In other words, central repositories, directories. So think of it as the redo of Napster. Remember Napster didn't have the music, but Napster pointed to who had the music? That's the really early music sharing stuff. I think I'd probably date myself when I start talking Napster, but like that kind of concept is definitely on the rise. There's definitely money going into that concept. So you're going to see companies come up with this directory type concept. Different than fractional ownership, but still using blockchains. Because once a document lives in a spot, it would always live in that spot. That's why you want to use a blockchain to do that. Also why you want fractional ownership, because you can have it as events like that. Another kind of application would be what I call the event application. In other words, what exactly happened? In this case, I'm kind of showing from the moment I established agency with the client to the point where I had an open house and I get an offer, and you can actually track exactly what happened in the transaction for your own protection. So these things I call event models. These are also being built right now. I expect some of these to come out again in the next year, year and a half. Event models in the space of real estate. I'm also involved with the standards organization. And in the standards organization called RESO, R-E-S-O, Real Estate Standards Organization, we have a work group out there to define what are the events that could be used in this kind of system so that all the vendors would have the same kind of events, which is really a good thing if you start mashing these things together. But that's an event model, totally different. So you got fractional ownership, we had directories, and we had events. Okay, then we're going to have, later on, this one's more complex because there's so many people involved. This is this application would come after, called the services model. This will come after the other ones, because the other ones are a little more simplistic. This is the ultimate vending machine model, where every step of the way in the transaction, you put a coin in to do the next step. Do this, then do this, then do this. And so there's smart contracts, remember, not legal contracts. Smart contracts, you push the button to move it down the line with every stage of your transaction here. This one is difficult because the people building these service models are not real estate people. Okay, they've read about it, and they figured, how hard could it be? Okay, so you're seeing some of them testing right now, you're saying, well, you're missing 5 steps, so this is very difficult. Now here's the problem. Blockchains never forget, so therefore, if you have this kind of services model, it has to be perfect. You can't go back and change something later. So it's that trial and error where you have to know all the actors, all the possible outcomes, and everything that can happen with every step, good and bad, good outcomes and bad outcomes. We got to this point and they didn't have the notarized statement. Okay, then you back up 2 steps. You have to have all that programmed in, every button that you push, in order for it to run. Therefore, you really have to have real knowledge of real estate. That's why I think this one will take 3 years to come out, because there'll be a couple trials and errors before somebody really gets this correct. This is a little difficult. Now, if you're writing popular trade magazines, this would be the one that you always talk about. Oh, someday you're not going to need realtors because the transaction will run itself. Okay, but I'm telling you that I'm a tech guy, I code every day. it is so complex what you do as a business that pushing a button is not as easy as it looks like on a diagram like this. That's why these other applications, fraction ownership, pretty easy. Directories, that's pretty easy. This will be the hardest one to do of all. But okay, now these first four will kind of come and go for the next 3 years, and you have different vendors claiming different things. Okay, then we're going to have the interoperability. Then we have the great shakeout. So that you guys will decide what wins in the market, what doesn't. After the great shakeout, we're going to have the interoperability. Interoperability is multiple blockchains playing together. This is even more difficult because you need standards to do this, but every industry, I believe, will have its own blockchains. So the fact that I don't think you'll have one blockchain that runs everything. I think the mortgage people are going to have theirs. The title people are going to have theirs. Real estate people have theirs. The county recorders will have their own. The identity people will be in here. But they all have to kind of work together somehow. So there has to be interoperability between them because you can't take 7 industries and make them all adopt the same system at the same time. And therefore I say mass innovation is an oxymoron. You can't have mass innovation at the same time. It doesn't, because innovate and mass innovate doesn't make any sense. Okay, so this group will kind of move forward, this one's behind, and they'll kind of move up, they'll decide, I'll interact with the mortgage people now. You know, I'll interact with the title people. But they'll all be doing variations on blockchain, but that interoperability stage, you're not gonna have one blockchain, it'll be multiple working together. It'll be a very complex problem. Not quite like the helix in the DNA, but it'll be very interesting, intricate type problem. And nobody's gonna invest in this interoperability until there's a shakeout first. Because you're not gonna interact with 1,000 different blockchains. You're gonna figure, well, who's the winners and losers? You got 3 here, you have 4 here, a little bit easier problem. If you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, you never can get to this point, and therefore you don't really have an economy at all. Okay, so let's talk about, before I did the shakeout, I'm not gonna talk about legislative stuff yet, because I'm coming to that in a few minutes. So, how will you know you're operating with a blockchain? Well, I'm gonna tell you you're not gonna know. The interfaces will look exactly the same. Whether you're on a screen or you're on a mobile phone, you will not know what's really happening underneath. So there is nothing different about the way it's visually looking to you. How it's happening underneath is different, but the applications themselves will look very simplistic the way that they are today. So don't expect any earth-shattering, oh, when you look at it, oh, that must be a blockchain, oh, that's a database. You won't notice the difference. It's all under the covers, okay? Okay, this is my name-dropping slide. Don't take notes on this because the notes will be available through Sabrina. There's 2 big worlds in my view here. Yes, you have the Bitcoin world. That's really the trading world in my view. You want to trade money and this kind of thing or do single transactions, you want to buy your Ferrari with Bitcoin, things like that. Okay, that's off here. Now, operationally for business, I think you have an Ethereum world and you have a Hyperledger world. Now, what makes these worlds go is not the technology, although you would think it's the technology. It's not. It's actually the players underneath who put the money into it. The players underneath are the ones to watch. So if you believe the Cisco, Microsoft, UBS type world is the one that's going to win here, that's the Ethereum world. If you think the IBM, Intel, American Express world, that's more of a Hyperledger world. Now, notice these are 2 different kinds of blockchains. So my prediction is that within 6 years, they start interoperating, right? And that's where it's going to happen. So I don't believe it's going to be a left side or a right side at all. Sometime they're going to meet up and start working together. Because you can't have the banks in Europe doing all the Hyperledger stuff and all the banks in the US do everything in Ethereum. It doesn't make any sense. Eventually there has to be some. But the players underneath right now are trying to capitalize and put their money and get their investment out of it. That's why you have 2 different worlds. Okay, so let's roll back. Promise of blockchains. Remember, hold your questions for the afternoon. Okay, remember databases. So it's driver's license, driving record. That's how you start thinking about it. Okay, so what's the promise of blockchains for real estate? Number 1 is to improve access to property records. Blockchains, there's no central authority. So if you would have something, maybe you got maybe all the agents and brokers in an area have a copy of it, you would have a copy of everything. Okay, there is no central database. There is no backups. So I don't have to have a system where I have to back things up because there's already 500 copies of it out there. If I blow my copy away, I'll get a copy from somebody else. In today's world, with central things, I have a central database, and of course you do nightly backups in case it fails. In a blockchain world, you don't. You count on distributing it out there. Reduce cost of business for the party, reduce risk, we talked about risk, and in closing faster. Now, before any of this can happen, we have to have standards, and there's two groups that I know of right now working on standards. It's a new topic. So two groups to think about, one is RESO and one's MISMO. RESO is the Real Estate Standards Organization. That was started by MLSs and MLS vendors, brokers, and agents. MISMO is the Mortgage Industry Standards Organization, Mortgage Industry Standards Management Organization. That's all the banks, the mortgage lenders. So they're both moving on blockchain, but they're not moving together. So we're going to have two different kinds of blockchains coming up here. You're going to have the housing side, and you're going to have the money side. Two different blockchains. So they should be working together. Now the RESO push is into events, such that you can actually look at a home. One way to do it is, what are the events for all time on this house? You know, every time it's been sold, every lien, every time I've paid the tax, you know, kind of running out like that way. Let's do it all events. There's a group up in San Jose, a brokerage, doing events, being the events for every sale of the house. In other words, how did you market the house? And then what they're going to do then is say, now I have another house coming on. What would be the best program to be able to sell this other house? But that starts to get into machine learning and things like that, which Alex is going to cover right after me. So blockchains can drive machine learning. There is a drive. They are related from that side. Okay, if you wanted to know more, you can phone in and listen to the people talk about this from the real estate side and the standard side every Thursday, the third Tuesday of each month. I'm the chair of the group. It's a phone call. It lasts no more than an hour. You just plug in if you want to listen to it. It's 1 o'clock Eastern, third Tuesday of every month. And I can get you that number if you just want to just listen in on the jargon that people are talking about. MISMO, that's the mortgage people, are just starting out. So they're actually behind the brokers and agents. Brokers and agents are further ahead as far as real estate events. But they're coming pretty quickly, and they have all different ideas, of course, than the MLSs, brokers, and agents have. So it should be a lot of fun coming through. Okay, so people say, well, how did you get to know all this stuff? Well, I used to work at NAR, and I can talk about, and I was a software developer, and I talk from experience. I built a blockchain for association data. And I know what I'm talking about because A, I built it and I made about 40 mistakes already that were catastrophic. So I speak to you from the fact that I've screwed up blockchains in a massive way many times. Okay, so the idea was to be able to get to know the members' information, no matter whether at a local, a state, or at the national level. So it'd be NAR, CAR, and the local association. What classes did you take? What events did you participate in? Believe it or not, associations do not share that information among each other, which is amazing. So if you all will decide at the end, near the end of your career to, instead of snowbirds, you actually move to Pierre, North Dakota to live out your retirement, all the information from here does not move up there and you start all over again. Local has no idea who you were. State of North Dakota doesn't know anything about you at all. So it's kind of like the way the licenses don't move. All the information, everything you've achieved never moves either. So the idea was, let's build a blockchain to get to understand the technology, and we'll do it just within the association side. And that's what the early blockchain work was. So it kind of looks like, that's where I came up with the metaphor for the events. So for any one member, it can actually look down on the right side of the screen, and see in order chronologically everything that you did impactful to the association. You know, donations you made, what committees you served on, things like this. So you actually build a whole resume, but not resume of you as a person. You know, we don't care where you lived, really. Don't care anything about your political things or what devices you own or things like that. It's your interaction from the association side, things you've done from that side. This was called the Association Blockchain. It did debut in the spring. Other totally unrelated work was done on the property side. Okay, so again, following the event side, it's called the property ledger. Can you actually keep track of everything that happens to a property? Just as we keep track of every committee you've ever been on, every education thing you did, can we keep track of using the same model, the event model, keep track of everything about the property itself? So there's a demo built of this, and this was before the standards group started going. We needed a way to prove to the standards people, where do you get started with blockchain? So in this case, it was for new builds, you'd actually decide what home to do, what are your amenities, and then on the bottom, it would show every step of the build process. Materials showed up on site, you know, the drywall showed up, the tile showed up as the wrong tile, had to be returned, things like this. So these are like the total build process. You can have that in a complete history going across the screen this way instead of up and down. I usually like to show it this way, but it was done this way. So again, this was done just to understand the technology, what they could do, so we can make mistakes without building product. Okay, so that's kind of where it started, where the standards are, and my view of what I think the next 5 to 7 years will look like. Okay? Now I want to go to a new topic here before we bring up Alex. I found a really interesting book. By the way, the book was recommended by a really smart guy. But I read this book. It's called Radical Markets. Very interesting book. If you don't know, Eric Posner was the primary author on this, a jurist, very famous jurist. He had a lot of the landmark cases, whatever. Then he decided to go teach economics at the University of Chicago. Very interesting book. The first 4 chapters, very radical. They cover off, you don't really own your property. How do you redo the voting model in the United States? Labor, redo labor and do corporate governance. Those weren't the interesting things. I think chapter 5 was the most interesting thing. So given how smart this person was, I think he wanted you to get through the book to go to chapter 5. It talks about data as labor, which I thought was a very interesting concept for blockchains, especially in real estate. So today, we all put information out here in Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat. You're always constantly feeding that model. These companies, they take that, and what do they do with your data when they put it together? They sell it, right? What do you get out of it? Nothing. Okay, so that's a pretty interesting model, huh? You're putting a lot of information together for something, putting it out here, and you get nothing for that. Are there any parallels? We'll talk about that in a minute. Are there any parallels to what we have in the real estate business? Okay, so I read this chapter 5, I thought that's pretty interesting, data as labor. So the concept goes like this, that if you're putting information out here that companies are then repackaging for you, how come you don't get some credit for that? Even a small bit of credit. Because what they're doing is hooking up machine learning, and they're actually learning from your data over time. Therefore, since you're teaching the machine, you should be paid also. Now the problem comes that this ends up being a Seinfeld moment because nobody's going to write 20-cent checks. It costs $5 to write the check, and the check's worth 20 cents. It doesn't make any sense. But can't there be a trickle of micro charges back and forth on this data? So his concept was to have consumers be compensated for feeding the engine, even in a minor way. So instead of paying $40 a month for a service, you get back, if you have a popular, every time your listing is looked at, you get a micro charge back. So maybe you earn $8 a month instead of paying $35 a month. This kind of reverses the economic model, which I thought was very interesting if you think that one through. So if you buy the book, it's almost, don't think I'm recommending chapters 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm actually recommending chapter 5, because when you read it, you'll say, I never want to listen to Less Wing talk again, because it talks about you don't really own, you don't own your property and things like this. That's chapter 1 and all. But chapter 5, reversing the flow, I thought was very interesting. So, if we look at this, I'm involved in another blockchain here called a real estate chain. And what real estate chain does, it reverses the flow. Therefore, if the consumer puts information out there and somebody starts looking at the home for information, some of the monies go back to the person who put the information out there. So it's a very interesting reverse flow of the information. Since somebody wants to do a study, an insurance company wants to do a study on certain kinds of roofing materials, they could find, give me everybody in this area that has the 30-year asphalt. It would come back, but since they did that charge, they would pay for that information, and everybody who was selected would get a microcharge back because somebody used your information. Also allows you to do AVMs, but on the inside of the house. So therefore, the homeowner could be compensated for that. So if somebody wanted to, say if you're an appliance manufacturer, and I'm a big one, like I'm Samsung, and I want to understand why people don't put total why are they mixing GE with Samsung, with Thermador? I want to study this. What are the most common patterns that people choose in their homes? You would actually could then do the market research, which people pay for today, they do. But as you're paying for it, you're actually compensating the people who put that information in to begin with. It's all done on a permission basis. That's called a prop wallet. Okay, so in the face of these different kinds of applications that I've been talking about here, what does it mean for the MLS? You know what it means? Nothing, because it's so early. Don't panic. So what does it mean for the title industry? Don't worry, don't panic. It's still shaping out. So people say it's the death of the MLS, people say it's the death of title. No, there's pressure on there, but it's not the death of anything yet, because nobody's really figured this out. It's all very up in the air. But it could mean a whole new kind of business for the MLS if they wanted to be enterprising in that side. But you don't want to invest too soon in it, because you lose on that. But it's very interesting from that side. So if you were an MLS, you were thinking about what might you do in blockchains, you might want to think about a very interesting way to share data. So instead of today, where if you're trying to run your website, you have to take the downloads all the time. So if you did it in a blockchain type way, it would come to you automatically as part of the design. There's no upload, download. It'd be nearly instantaneous. Somebody changes a fact about a property, you would have it immediately. Well, within 2 or 3 minutes, by the time the transactions run through. By the way, one of the downsides of blockchains, does anybody know how long you can expect a Bitcoin transaction? How long does it take to execute that? It could be between 20 minutes and 3 days. So therefore, if anybody at all thinks that, boy, blockchains are going to take over, just think about this. By the time you fill up your Tesla with power, you have to wait just as long to get the transaction through to pay for it. That's why it's not a database. Don't confuse them at all. Okay. Just want to say that because if you did do a blockchain in an MLS to share the data out to the brokerages for the websites, there would be a delay in there. It'd be a little bit of a delay, but you wouldn't have to upload, download. You could run a different change on the compensation model. That'd be really radical and interesting. You got to think it through, of course. But wouldn't that be interesting? Of course, it'd always be online since there is no central database in the blockchain model. But it's an amazing way to do copyright protection. Anybody who's using you fought for that listing. I mean, it's a war out there, right? You got to get a listing. It's really hard to get listings, right? So why would you have somebody else just take off with it then? And so that whole protection of copyright thing, much better in blockchains, because blockchains never forget, right? They know exactly where that started. So it's very interesting. You can do the compensation side, but you can track who's using it. Anyways, I don't think that MLSs should look away from this. They should run to it somehow and start thinking about, in cooperation with the subscribers here, what are you trying to do, and how can we actually just really make real estate better? That's my message. Okay, next topic here. Is regulation and legislation. Someday, the politicians are going to go out there trying to help us in this area, okay? So we've already lived through what happened with net neutrality. Remember that? Because everybody's trying to help everybody. It gets mixed up, and the language was wrong. It didn't really match the reality. But, you know, the politicians were trying to do the right thing. They really were. They just don't know enough of it to understand what's going on. So I wrote a white paper on this. And here's what I found out, that nothing's happening at the federal level yet. They seem to be distracted with other issues on a daily basis, but nothing's happening on the federal side. But you know who's moving on this? The states are. So there's legislation moving in 23 states. Here's the scary part. So I looked at the language and I figured, well, if I can do software, I can actually read these legal documents, legislative language. So I learned how to read these things. Turns out they're like contracts. They have a definition section at the top and, you know, talking about the law itself. So I started reading the different legislations, and what I realized was the definitions of all the components of blockchains, or also called distributed ledgers, are different in every state. I'll give you an example. One state says a smart contract is just like a legal contract. That's actually written into the law. Another state says a smart contract is only a computer program. But it's interesting, these two states are right next to each other. So what would be legal in one state is not going to be legal in the other one because the basis of the law is different in every state. So some of the big industries out here all lobby at the federal level. They're all missing this. So how can we get somebody, what organizations actually operate at the federal level and the state level and the local level all at once? Well, I'll tell you, you know who does that? Realtors do this. Through RPAC, you can affect, I don't even work for NAR, but you can actually affect the local, the state, and the federal type things to keep it all sane and straight. So in a crazy way, not crazy, in a realistic way, I think realtors could actually save blockchain technology by getting involved so at least the states all have similar language to start with. Otherwise, any kind of interstate commerce is going to get all whacked out of shape completely because everybody has a different, but every state thinks they're doing the right thing for all their constituents, but their languages are really whacked out. Now remember, at the net neutrality went to federal first. Blockchains are starting at state first, then going to some federal thing. But they're not going to be able to figure out at the federal level a compromise because every state will be so different as to what they're doing. So these things are moving. And my white paper on that website, I have every law for every state and give you a snapshot of the language so you can see yourself what's happening there. I urge you to get your GADs involved, but that's that's an association deal, not my deal. Okay, identity. Identity is a big issue here. And I'm going to talk about, I just did a blog post on this topic. Some terms we should know about here. I talked about GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. It's for the EU. So it says that any person living in the EU has the right to be forgotten. So I go to a website, you have my information. At some time later, I can write you a letter or an email, probably an email, right, because we're talking modern days. I write an email saying, please erase all my information, and you have to do it. If you don't do it, it is I think it's a $100,000 fine. No, it's 10% of a 1 year's revenue if you don't do it. Now, here's the problem with the jurisdiction for this law goes beyond just the EU. So if there's any information in a US-based thing, you can be sued in the EU for the information that's in your database. So you have to start thinking about what information do you have? Are you able to delete it on demand or not? Or, but you are not protected just because a person asks these other companies and you still have it. It's not a safe harbor for you. So the legislators out in the EU have a really crazy law out here, but real teeth in it. But the problem is blockchains never forget. This is a real problem. So now we have brand new technology that never forgets, and we've got legislators writing things that allow people to tell you to forget. This is really interesting. So how do you have legislators and regulators work with the businesses as we try to move ahead in efficiency? I think it's very interesting from that side. So that's the GDPR concept. You Google search GDPR, lots of stuff out there. I say the right to be forgotten, just like I make it easy with driver's license, driver's record. So GDPR is the right to be forgotten. KYC, know your customer. What this is anti-money laundering type measures. I think we all know what happened in Canada. Do we know what happened in Canada? You're required as a broker or an agent to report suspicious activity, or if you have an inkling that the money may not be clean money, you have to report it. So here's the implication on it, that you have to have systems in place to do this, because if one of your customers later on would buy a condo in Toronto and they found out it was like dirty money from China or whatever like that, you as the broker would get sued. Big time, because you should have known. Okay, yeah, so this is crazy stuff. So this stuff's getting very popular as far as helping protect the consumer from anti-money laundering, or AML, they use that word a lot. So AML and KYC. So know your customer, and AML is anti-money laundering. Now what KYC is doing, you're going to see this if you play at all in buying stocks or sacks of wheat or Bitcoin. The same thing, it's all that stock market stuff, right? You're playing with the money. As you start getting in and start buying coins, you'll see they're going to say, who are you, what's your address, show me your driver's license. They actually take a picture of it. That's all KYC type of things, so they know your identity. Because on a blockchain, you don't really know who is who. There's a number, but you don't have any identity associated with it. So KYC measures are going to start moving in to know that. I think that's an opportunity for real estate here, to really understand who the people are you're dealing with. I think a lot of people do open houses, they have you show a driver's license, but going through a KYC type experience might actually be good. And actually set up also the transaction long term if you know who the customer is in a blockchain type sense. So you're going to see more of these identity things coming out, and they're known to tech folks like KYC. Of course, we have to invent something new. We have to call it cloud or something. We'll invent some catchy name for it. Right now, it's called KYC. And a lot of people think that I'm too small to deal with. That they're going to go after the big companies. They don't. The bad people go after the small companies because they know you don't have any measures in place. Okay, so if you're worried about escrow type of things and who am I dealing with, whatever, because they know you won't have any of these measures in place is why exactly they will pick on you first. A lot of people don't know this, that 43% of all cyber crimes are at mid-sized and small businesses. They're actually not at the big ones at all. That's a stunning fact. Also that within 9 months, most companies, in fact, you had a real big case here. They didn't go out of business, but most of the companies that get hacked this way go out of business within 9 months because the debt is so devastating to them. Everybody knows what happened to Alan Pinnell up there, up in San Jose type area. Well, they got hacked. Everything got hacked. They had to shut down their brokerage. That's a big brokerage. For almost a month, nothing could happen. So they lost a lot of revenue. They survived, which is a good thing on that side. Okay, so at this point, I've got email addresses. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. But I'll tell you, I got to spend a minute here and actually set up this next speaker. Okay, and we're going to, I think we're going to hold questions to the session in the afternoon, or should we take a couple now? I think I've got a couple minutes. Oh, you know what? We're going to go off script. Go ahead, ask a question. Okay, the question was, when I talked about fractional ownership at the very beginning, one of my first applications, do they have to comply with any kind of regulatory type of thing? Absolutely not. Right, so is this the tech people missing something real? Probably. Remember I said before, there's other people building blockchain stuff, and they're missing out the real factors out here? Right, they're moving ahead right now without any kind of compliance at all to any kind of structure. Okay.
Also on the RESO standards,
yes.
Are they using which which consensus algorithm? Do you know?
Neither at this point, but it's probably going to be proof of stake over time. It's a good tech question, actually. So Bitcoin is proof of work. That's all those miners generating all the electricity. Proof of stake is, who has the most to lose out of this transaction. They get to make the rule. And we're going to just take two.
Right.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Conrad. I'm a broker. Selling those securities is basically what it falls under, and that is regulated. I mean, you can get in serious trouble by selling fractional shares and stuff like that, and selling securities.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that comment. And that's the difference between, like, the reality. So people are moving this technology so fast, they're ignoring all that, and they could really get in trouble doing that. But there are definitely folks doing it, and they're following the Indian and Korean model of trying to bring it to the U.S. But I think the federal government will probably break down on that, the same as they would with initial coin offerings.
Yeah, because you need to warn people about whatever the risk factor and how much income they have. So basically, you can't devastate their finances and stuff like that. Is what the model is right now.
Yeah, right now you don't have to register them at all. I mean, it's crazy. But you're going to start seeing it come out. It'll be controversial, so you got to watch that space. I'm not a proponent. I'm just trying to say this is what's coming. And this is a good opportunity to actually educate consumers.
Steve DeVry, Berkshire Hathaway. As far as the blockchain companies like IBM, Global Chain, GEM, Cisco, and a couple of other companies, who are the leaders? Who are the great companies to invest in blockchain? As you say, we're just at the beginning of it.
Okay, so who are the great companies to invest in? This is interesting because the companies who are really innovative here are not going to traditional venture capital money. So therefore, to say it's this company or this company, they're doing these things called initial coin offerings. So instead of initial public offering, where you'd have a stock and you can get in the stock early, whatever, they're doing initial coin offerings. And this is, again, another regulatory issue, that people are having coins out here instead of stocks. Therefore, is it really a security coin or a utility coin? That's kind of up in the air right now. Well, it's not up in the air because the federal government wants to say they're all securities. The companies doing it want to say that they're utility tokens, such that if it's a security token, you have to follow all the rules. If it's a utility one, you don't have any rules. So they're using ICOs instead of IPOs, initial coin offerings, to raise money faster with no strings attached. But the problem is, when you give that no strings attached, there's no product either. And what happened about a year and a half ago, there's several well-known cases where people put up ICOs, raised a bunch of cash, and then moved to Belize. So you gave your money, I don't know, you're just a number, right? There's no identity. You bought the coins, you gave them the coins, they left the country. Who do you talk to, the FBI? They say, well, prove you did this. You sent your money to some address. See, there's no real controls. That's where KYC started to move in, know your customer, because they're trying to say, who are these people you're really dealing with? But all this regulation is behind where the technology is. So it's a fascinating space to watch. So who are the companies to invest in? I can't give you any right now because they're all over the place. And there's a lot of them going out there, and everybody says they have the blockchain solution. Okay, so I ran over my time. Okay, so 11:30 here. I want to bring up this next person. I respect him greatly. Alex Velkowski, very, very smart dude. He's really funny. Once you get to know him, otherwise he's pretty stiff. No, he's a great guy. He really knows his material, though, and he comes at it from an educational side. I think you'll really enjoy it because he really knows his material very well. So without further ado, Alex Velkowski.
Alrighty, thank you everybody for having me here today. Excellent presentation, Mark. Wonderful to learn a little bit about blockchain every single time that I sit in on one of his presentations. I learn something, so thank you for that. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Alexander Velkowski, and what I want to do is I want to go through an introduction about myself, my background, so you can learn a little bit about me, what I do, and so forth and so on. Then we'll get into a little bit about artificial intelligence. I know you had a speaker come in here last year to talk a little bit about AI, but I wanted to take a step back and really kind of think about what do we mean when we're talking about artificial intelligence? What is the history of AI and how AI is potentially going to impact the real estate market? I'm going to give a quick example about AI in practice, an example that I think is really fascinating example that illustrates the future of AI in real estate, so I think you'll really enjoy that. And then I'll talk about the intersection of AI and blockchain and where I think that's headed, and then I'll wrap it up with a discussion about the future of real estate just in general. Is now a good time to announce my ICO? No, probably not. All right, so instead we'll get into the introduction. So, again, a little bit about me. I earned doctorate, master, and bachelor degrees in business with focus in economics from Lawrence Tech University based in Southfield, Michigan, as well as executive education from the University of Pennsylvania, focused on marketing metrics and understanding how we can leverage data to impact outcomes in an organization from a marketing perspective. I started my career at a company called Daimler AG, and most of you may know Daimler AG. You know some of their brands, Mercedes, maybe Freightliner trucks, Detroit Diesel, engines. So I worked for them for almost 6 years, started off as a management trainee, but sort of worked up and started to get involved in analytics and how we can leverage data to better understand our products, how we can leverage data to better serve the needs of our customers. And that's really where my passion for data, analytics, artificial intelligence really came from. After I worked at Daimler AG, I moved, that was in Detroit, I moved over to Chicago and founded a marketing analytics and research division of a company called Rewards Network. And most of you are familiar with Rewards Network, though not through their name. We managed the loyalty reward programs for a lot of the major airlines and hotel chains. So when you were let's say staying at a Hilton and you were earning points for dining at a restaurant, that was my organization that was managing that relationship for you and helping you earn those rewards. So spend a lot of time really trying to think about how we can leverage data, how we can leverage analytics to, again, better serve our customers, provide them with better dining experiences, connect them to restaurants that we thought that they would enjoy, while at the same time trying to turn a profit, right? The last 4 years, I've been working with the National Association of Realtors, most of those years under the direction of the great Mark Leswing, and recently moved over to the research division within NAR under a guy by the name of Lawrence Yoon, which I'm sure many of you know. So what I do is I try to think about how data can be used in the context of real estate, mostly from the member's perspective, to help understand how we can better serve the members. What are some of the products and services that we could offer to the membership to help enhance their outcomes, and so forth and so on. So for the past 4 years, I've been working on a system that we are now calling MIND, which is the Member Insight Data Lab. It is a culmination of many years of work of trying to understand what data we have about our members, how we can integrate that data together in a way that we can then start to use it more efficiently and effectively as a trade organization. So I've been doing that for the past 4 years. I also teach at the College of Computing at DePaul University, which is based in Chicago. I teach courses in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and time series analysis, which is also under the umbrella of machine learning. And I founded and lead a major artificial intelligence and machine learning meetup group in the Chicago area called Chicago ML. So if any of you are in Chicago or simply want to join to learn more about artificial intelligence and how it could potentially impact not only the real estate industry but beyond, I highly encourage you to take a look at Chicago ML. So now let's take a look at artificial intelligence and really try to dig deep and understand what it is that artificial intelligence means and how people are using it today. When I talk about AI, and I've talked about AI, I guess I've been at over 60 conferences in the last 2 years talking about artificial intelligence in real estate. A lot of people don't realize that AI is actually not new. AI has a significant history. People just assume, oh, we're hearing about AI now, it's been the last couple of years, and therefore this is a new technology that we need to understand. But AI really goes back to the 1940s. Since AI is a confluence of many disciplines, whether we're talking about mathematics, computer science, philosophy, history, a lot of researchers tend to lump up these topics in AI's prehistory, which would be before the 1940s. But AI really started to come about in the modern sense with the development of something called a neural network, which many of you have probably heard in passing, and that was in the early 1940s. So what the neural network tries to do is it tries to model itself as an algorithm loosely on the human biological neural network, and attempts to improve the performance of some outcome based on that algorithm. And that, again, was in the 1940s, and that's really when we can say artificial intelligence really started to take shape. In the 1950s, a man by the name of Alan Turing came up with this concept of a Turing test. His question was, can machines think? That's a really interesting question, because what do we mean by thinking? Okay? What makes something intelligent or smart? So what he tried to do is he tried to simplify the discussion, and he said, well, I'm going to create this test where I have a judge, and the judge has one individual and one machine on the other side of essentially a wall, okay? And the question is, can the judge distinguish answers to a question? Can they distinguish between the machine and the human? If the judge cannot distinguish between the machine and the human, then the machine is judged to be intelligent. So again, taking that simplified view of AI and not really focusing in on the philosophical question of whether or not a machine is intelligent and what that means, what makes a machine smart, really just simplifying it and talking about can a human tell the difference? And if the human cannot tell the difference, then therefore the machine is intelligent. The official birth of the study of artificial intelligence occurred in 1956 at something called the Dartmouth Conference. There were a lot of researchers in this space early on that were sort of focusing in on research in a lot of different areas, a lot of different aspects of artificial intelligence. And a couple of folks got together and said, we really need to sit down as a collective group of people, and we need to talk about what is the future direction of our research in AI, and how can we really home in on those questions that matter and then guide our research in that way. So the official birth of AI is generally considered to be 1956. And then from there, in 1965, we had expert systems based upon reasoning. So many of you have heard of these these logical questions, and one might be, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. Well, is Socrates mortal? Well, the answer to that would be yes, based on the logical reasoning of the statement. So a lot of early systems that were used in organizations were really relying upon this idea of reasoning and this idea of logic built into expert systems to make decisions. In 1986, we had this sort of rebirth of neural networks with a technique called backpropagation. And backpropagation, very simply for the purposes of this presentation, is simply an enhanced way of training a neural network. So backpropagation allows researchers to get better performance on neural network predictions, and that was a huge innovation in the 1980s. And today, a lot of the focus that's being done from an AI perspective is based on research that is wrapped around what we call intelligent agents. And by agents, we really mean software agents. Software agents, computer programs that operate in some sort of environment, take in information from that environment, and make decisions. And that's where a lot of the research is going today. So, what is artificial intelligence? Simply put, AI is the study and practice of making machines smart. But this is, again, a very tough question. What makes a machine smart? If I get into my vehicle right now and I drive the roads, I navigate back to my hotel, would you consider me smart? Probably no. The answer would be no. That'd be my guess. But if a vehicle does that, if a machine does that, if the machine is capable to take me autonomously to my destination without intervention from me, is that smart? Okay, that's interesting. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So what we need to do is we really need to come up with a framework for thinking about how we can deduce this idea of being smart in a machine. We can look at the Turing test as an example of that, or we can move forward to this idea of intelligent agents. So the way that researchers typically think about this is in a couple of different categories. And it really comes down to whether or not the machine has the ability to, quote unquote, think in a particular context or act in a particular context. So the first one I'll point out is acting humanly, which is the Turing test example. So if I am a judge and I am asking questions to a machine and to a human, and I cannot distinguish between the two, then I have an intelligent machine actor, okay? And a lot of research focuses on solving the Turing test in a lot of different AI contexts. But there is also this concept of thinking humanly, and this is where it gets really difficult. So the thinking humanly context is building artificial intelligence agents that can mimic the functioning of the brain. The only problem is we don't know how the brain actually operates. I read a statistic somewhere that we know less than 5% or less than 3% of how the brain actually works. So this research is far off. Developing AI agents that have the ability to think humanly, this isn't really our focus when we're talking about things in the context, for instance, in real estate. There is thinking rationally, which is the example of expert system, where we use these laws of reasoning, we use logic to try to create systems that can do things that we think make sense based on logical patterns. And then we have this last part, which is acting rationally, and that's where we're getting into these rational agents, these intelligent agents, software agents that are able to interact with an environment and make decisions. So if we focus in on the intelligent agent aspect, we can come up with a definition of smart that can really guide the work that we do, whether it be in the real estate industry or beyond. And this is one of the reasons why we focus as researchers on this new area of intelligent agents. And that is, a machine is smart when it is able to select an action that maximizes the value of an outcome. So a very, very focused definition of smart that can help us in any way define whether or not a machine exhibits intelligence. If the machine is capable of maximizing the value of an outcome, then we say the machine is smart. And there are a lot of cases like this that exist in the real estate market. We're going to get in one of these cases where we're talking about potentially predicting the price of a property. Okay? Whether or not the property will sell at a given price, and what is the likelihood at different price ranges. So this would be an example of how we're able to maybe maximize the value of the outcome, for instance, the sale of a property, leveraging tools in artificial intelligence and machine learning. A quick note on autonomy, because I think a lot of people that I've spoken to about AI over the last several years, they automatically think that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about robots that are completely autonomous. Many of you may have even seen some of these robots that are built by Boston Dynamics that are navigating property, and then there's a spoof on that makes that robot act like a realtor, and he's navigating the property, trying to figure out what the property lines are. That's really fun, but that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about AI in real estate today. Machines have a level of autonomy, and when we talk about AI, the machines don't have to be completely autonomous. There can be some built-in knowledge that the machine is provided to help it make better decisions. So when we read the popular press, a lot of this focus is in on how do we deal with the future of any particular industry, because a lot of people are concerned about artificial intelligence, when we have these machines that are completely autonomous that operate. But the reality is there are varying degrees of autonomy, and we need to keep that in mind. And if we think about it from a human perspective, humans might necessarily not be completely autonomous. We have some built-in knowledge, some intuition, right, that we use to operate and navigate the environment. Now, we become smarter over time as we navigate an environment and we learn from it, but we also have a level of built-in knowledge. So this is where the research is actually thinking about what is that level, what does it mean, and how can we potentially use that when we are building solutions to various problems in industry. So then that gets us to this topic of machine learning. When folks talk about machine learning, sometimes they talk about it as equivalent to AI. They're sort of using the term to mean the same thing, machine learning and artificial intelligence. But machine learning is actually a subdiscipline of artificial intelligence. It is the actual algorithms that are being used to help machines become smart, to help machines learn. And the way that the machines learn is they learn from data, okay? So when we're talking about machine learning, you can think about machine learning almost in the context of traditional statistical models that you've maybe thought of or heard of or interacted with at some point in your course of business. Maybe the automated valuation model is an example of that, okay? Leverages data to try to make better decisions about some outcome. So what does this look like from an analytical perspective? So let's take a step back and not talk about these artificial agents. Let's talk about how we use machine learning as data scientists to solve problems. So what you see here is a knowledge discovery framework that was developed many years ago. And the knowledge discovery framework is still very relevant today. So as a data scientist, what I do is I leverage this framework to help understand things, okay? I have to figure out, if I have a problem, what data do I need in order to solve that problem, okay? So when I talked about the work that I'm doing at NAR, this kind of concept called MIND, the Member Insight Data Lab, where we're taking data and integrating it together, because we think that there could be some value from that data. So everything in an analytical context really revolves around data. And the quality of the data is very important, which is one of the reasons why AI and blockchain are very interesting conversations. So you start with data. Then as an analyst, you have to figure out, of the data that you have available to you, what data matters. That's a traditional view of looking at things from the data scientist perspective. I have to figure out what data do I think matters to the problem. But maybe a machine could do that better. That's where we start talking about the future of machine learning and AI in real estate and beyond. We take that data, we process the data, we transform the data so that it fits statistical properties that make sense for us, and then we get to this phase of the process called data mining. And this term is generally used synonymously with machine learning. This is where we deploy algorithms, different types of models, like linear models or neural networks or legit models or something else, to extract patterns from the data, okay? By extracting patterns from the data, you are then able to come up with some sort of knowledge that you can use to solve a problem. So for instance, I may be working with membership data, and I may see that members tend to cluster with particular committees in their engagement. Well, that would be me deploying a model on data of member committee involvement, and then understanding the patterns in which members are actually serving on committees. Okay, so that's how I would use this particular framework in order to solve problems in that context. And then from there, again, you come up with this interpretation or this knowledge that you use to solve problems. When we're talking about artificial intelligence and making this process autonomous, that's a very interesting proposition for us. Because if you have an autonomous vehicle, is the autonomous vehicle really going to be capable of going through each and every single one of these little processes, waiting for its data scientists to figure out, well, should I do this in this environment? Should I do that? How should I interact? This doesn't really work in the context of an autonomous vehicle, because the vehicle needs to make decisions in real time, quickly, more quickly than an analyst or a data scientist is capable of doing, right? So I wanted you to get a sense for AI, the fact that it's not new, and all of the different ways in which researchers are thinking about artificial intelligence, because that has an impact on how we view how AI may potentially impact our business. So with that, I want to get into an example, both a traditional example of artificial intelligence in the context of an automated valuation model, and one example about how researchers are actually taking that to the next level using more advanced techniques in machine learning. So here we have a database of information about various properties. So we have a property ID, we have the number of bedrooms, we have the number of bathrooms, we have whether or not the house has a garage, whether or not it's a waterfront property, and then the sale price. In a traditional type of approach, okay, what we would do is we would take this data, we would build a model to try to understand the relationships that exist among the different features in the data, with each element of the home being a feature of the home, and then spit out a prediction about that home's value. That's really interesting, and that's done reasonably well, not great, but reasonably well at predicting the value of a property. But there are a lot of things that are missing from that. Remember what we talked about a little bit earlier. We said the data is really where a lot of the value comes from. Because without the right data, you're not going to be able to identify the right patterns to help you solve a problem. Without high quality data, Again, you're not going to be able to go through that process of figuring out what patterns make sense given the particular data and solve a problem properly. Because if the data is of low quality, then you'll have low predictions. And many of you see this when you're dealing with automated valuation models on particular properties that are just simply way off from the reality in your local market. So what the researchers did in the context of taking this to the next level, this is a couple of guys out of, I believe it was Columbia. They said, you know, this whole process of building automated valuation models using this traditional MLS data like bedrooms, bathrooms, and so forth and so on, that's really great, but I think there is something that's missing, okay? If I were to talk to my wife about a property, yeah, she cares about the number of bedrooms and the bathrooms and the square footage and all of those fun things. But she's also interested in something like curb appeal or attractiveness of the property to her. How do you quantify that? Could we get better predictions as to the value of the property if we started to think about attractiveness, or if we were somehow able to capture the attractiveness of a property or the curb appeal of a property through data? So what they did is they started to leverage techniques in artificial intelligence, some of these techniques that we discussed, specifically neural networks, and they took a data set from San Jose, California, and from Rochester, New York, a data set of properties from the local MLSs in that area, and they said, we're going to exclude all information from the MLS listing, and we're going to focus just on the images. That's it. So we got a collection of images about a property, and we're going to try to extract data, leveraging neural networks, from that image, and then we're going to try to make predictions upon that data. Fascinating question. What they were able to accomplish is really amazing. So in the San Jose market, the researchers were able to get to 4.5% accuracy, plus or minus the sale price, in that local market using images alone. That is either at or better than the current automated leading valuation models that are available using traditional data in an MLS listing. Rochester, New York, same thing. The spread is a little bit bigger. The researchers were about 10% off on average in that particular market, but that was also within the range of being at or better than the prevailing traditional automated valuation models in that market. So think about how leveraging these new and innovative and interesting techniques are really moving the real estate industry forward by taking into consideration things that we haven't been able to take into consideration before. And that's really the power of artificial intelligence in our market. So let's take a look at, since we've kind of talked about what AI is, why it's important, and how people are using artificial intelligence to enhance outcomes in the real estate industry, let's take a look at where the intersection of artificial intelligence and blockchain could potentially come. So as Mark described better than I could, blockchains provide a verifiable and trustworthy record of events or transactions, and he gave a couple of really good examples of that. Blockchains are verifiable because the data is available publicly, in many cases, for you to see and verify on your own, okay? And they're trustworthy because of this concept of immutability that Mark talked about. The big fancy word, immutability, I didn't understand what it was until I listened to Mark's presentation. But immutability is, again, about not being able to modify a transaction once the transaction has been recorded in the blockchain. It is there forever. So because blockchains are verifiable and trustworthy, they're extremely powerful in the context of artificial intelligence, right? The better quality data we have that we can verify and that we can trust, the more trustworthy our artificial intelligence techniques will become. Because the data that we're using to build models, the data that we're using to help these artificial software agents interact with their environment is better. And that just is a great thing for us researchers on the AI side. So one example that Mark talked about was this idea of having enhanced property records. So I have this picture here. I use it in a couple of different contexts, but in the context of an enhanced property record, let's say we go through a process. This is my home, and I've renovated the home. This is a beautiful kitchen, okay? I want to get this data into the blockchain because the fact that I have a renovated kitchen, maybe with a new refrigerator, maybe with new granite counters, maybe with a new faucet, a nice luxurious faucet, maybe with a new chandelier or something like that. I want to get this data in the blockchain so that I can enhance the value of my property. And I want the buyer of my property, if my property is for sale, to be able to verify and trust that the thing that I am marketing to them actually exists in the way that I describe it. So enhanced property records are extremely useful in the transaction of real estate, but it's also useful from the perspective, again, of AI, being able to verify and trust that what is presented actually is accurate of the property. So some of the key features that blockchain provides are also some of the key things that artificial intelligence provides when it's combined with the blockchain. And there are 4 things that I really want to focus on, and a lot of these 4 things Mark also discussed. That is scalability, security, privacy, and serving as a data gatekeeper. Okay? All of these extremely critical propositions that are provided by blockchain and AI. So let's take a look at scalability. This is an interesting graphic, and what it attempts to do is it attempts to describe what folks are calling fragmented learning, okay? And the idea of this is that we have the ability to build a model in a centralized way, right? We have all of this data that's centrally located, and we have the ability to build a model on all of that data that we have available to us in a central repository. But there are a lot of things that happen, let's say, in somebody's home, in this context, or on your smartphone, or on some other device, that we can't necessarily capture, bringing it up to a cloud in a centralized storage kind of environment to build models and do things with. So this example looks at thermostats and thermostat temperatures. So the idea is we have a collection of homes that we're able to share information with us, and we've been able to build an aggregate model for those collection of homes. The model predicts that on average, folks want their temperature 78 degrees, let's just say, okay? But that may not fit for the context of your home, your property, and the way that you live, okay? So the idea is you take this model that's been built by whatever organization is providing it. It could be Google, Nest, any organization. And once you start interacting with the home, once you start changing the temperatures, the devices are able to learn from your behaviors and then predict what it is that you prefer in the home in different contexts. So without sending any detailed data to the central authority or the person that's providing this to you, the service, you can only send changes, the things that the machine has learned over the course of observing your behavior within the property, okay? Then you take those changes, you mix them in with other folks at the aggregate level, and then all of those changes together end up providing some sort of a consensus update to the machine learning model that is centrally located. So that update's provided, and then the model's updated, and now the consensus estimate, for instance, is 76 degrees or some other number, okay? So it's complicated, but what this is trying to illustrate is the idea of decentralized machine learning using data that exists locally on folks' devices or decentralized across various nodes or computers to be able to make better decisions, and that's one of the ways in which the blockchain and artificial intelligence really come together. Security. So this was a diagram that that describes sort of in a chain of events of a property what you might be able to record. So for instance, for this particular property, we've recorded 3 bedrooms at some point in the history of the property. Recorded a new furnace at some point in the history of the property. Well, wait a minute, now we have 4 bedrooms at some point in the history of the property, and then maybe new hardwood floors at some point in the history of the property. So if I'm looking at this data, one thing that stands out to me, the data in the blockchain, is the fact that I went from 3 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms, and the property might be being marketed as a 4-bedroom home. The question that I would have would be, does the property actually have 4 bedrooms, or is this being marketed inappropriately? Because I see that a property actually had 3 bedrooms. So it is in fact possible that folks can invest in their properties and turn their property from a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom or something bigger if they want to. But it may not be likely. So by having data available to you to verify that you can trust, you're able to say to yourself, now, where could there potentially be areas within this observation that I'm looking at that might not make sense, okay? That might be fraudulent. And then you can dig a little bit deeper and actually figure out what's going on. And with automated machine learning techniques, artificial intelligence techniques, we can do this automatically. We can automatically flag these records to say there's a discrepancy in the number of bedrooms that have occurred in the history of this property, and I don't see in the history of the property pulling a permit. I don't see whatever else is required in order to get a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom, so therefore it is suspicious, it's flagged as potentially being fraudulent, and then you as a consumer or a professional in this business or something else can begin to do a little bit of work to figure out now what is actually going on in the property. Okay? So security is another excellent feature. When AI is combined with blockchain, you can really enhance outcomes. Privacy. So data that is stored on the blockchain may be publicly available, but it can be encrypted. Okay? So when data is encrypted, it's traditionally difficult for us to extract insights from it. So I have here illustrated a description of a property. So this property has 3 beds, 2 baths, and a beautiful kitchen. The owner is 65 years old and has lived in the home for 30 years. This is interesting information that, leveraging techniques in machine learning, we might be able to parse out some information that we could use to help make a prediction about the owner's likelihood to sell the property in, a given period of time or something like that. It could be any number of things. But that information may also be somewhat sensitive, okay? So now how do we take data that's stored on the blockchain that could potentially be encrypted, still be able to build models and make predictions about some problem that we find valuable or important, so still derive that value, but in that context? And this is where these privacy-preserving techniques to artificial intelligence and machine learning come from. And the idea is you take this data that exists in some whatever format that you want it to be. So it could be a text field, it could be maybe just kind of like a traditional variable, like an integer or something like that. You can encode that from a privacy perspective and still build models. So this is really, I think, one of the great future aspects of artificial intelligence and machine learning that I think could be really powerful. And not only can you take the underlying data within a property record and encrypt it and then build models off of the encrypted data, preserving that privacy to the homeowner, but you could also encrypt the model that you build, okay? That gets into a whole other set of interesting concepts and problems, but it's really something that I want you to think about from a privacy perspective. And last but not least, the data gatekeeper. So we have all of this data on the blockchain, and Mark did a great job of talking about the different values that come from having the data on the blockchain. Accessibility is one of them. But from an AI perspective, how are we utilizing that data? Are we using it to its greatest potential? How are we making sense of that data? What are the processes that are being done in order to make sense of this data? Are we making sense of it at all? This is where the intersection of AI and blockchain really starts to take off. The ability to take this verifiable and trustworthy data, to be able to build models to solve problems off of that data, and to do so in a way that would enhance outcomes in a way that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, right? So that's where another area where I think artificial intelligence and machine learning could have a great impact on the industry, especially when it's connected with the blockchain. I guess one other thing that I forgot to mention is that blockchain helps AI explain itself. AI is, in general, very difficult to understand, both for researchers and also for people that are not doing work in the AI space. And a lot of folks, especially folks in business, they want to say to themselves, I'm not really sure that I understand what's going on with these models. Like maybe I built a neural network that predicted the price of a property, and I'm trying to explain to a homeowner that their property is worth this much. Well, tell me what's going on with the neural network. Well, I guess that's where everything kind of stops, because I don't really know what the neural network is doing, right? I know it's taking an input. I know that it's doing something inside this quote-unquote black box, and I know it's providing me an output. But I don't necessarily know what's going on in between. What's great about blockchain is blockchain can record all of the different events that occur during the model building process and provide end users the capability of going back and auditing what did the model actually do, what data did it access, and so forth and so on. This is extremely powerful in the real estate context and beyond. Think about, for instance, healthcare. Patient records are sensitive, but we still could potentially use patient records to make predictions about health and health outcomes that could be valuable for the patient themselves. But folks want to know, well, how is this data being used? What data is being used to make predictions about somebody's health? How did we actually get to that point? Who else potentially accessed that data? By recording all of the transactions that occur from the model itself, and by transaction, I essentially mean events, the things that the machine learning model is doing, what it's accessing, by recording it in a blockchain, now we can enhance the trust of AI. We can begin to understand how AI is actually operating, what it's doing, and that can help us down the line when we decide to use it to actually solve problems. So with that, let's kind of look a little closer at some of the things that we talked about and try to highlight how these things could be used in the future to enhance the real estate industry. So Mark talked about fractional ownership. Fractional ownership is something that folks are already working on. One company he named that is doing work in this space is Consensus. And this is something that is coming. This is going to be part of the future. But now the question becomes, from an AI perspective, are we great at predicting the value of a property as a whole? Maybe we are, maybe we're not. Maybe we're getting better over time. But how are we now going to predict the value of fractional ownership? That's an interesting question to me. So if I have, for instance, maybe this could also go into single-family homes. Maybe I have a ranch. Maybe I have a west wing and an east wing, and I'm trying to sell fractional ownership in the property, maybe the east wing. Well, how is that valued in comparison to the west wing? It may be a little bit different, right? Maybe I have an updated bathroom in the east wing. Maybe I have hardwood floors in the east wing, and I don't have that on the west side of the house. So how do I take that into consideration when I am selling that value to potentially a fractional owner? So it's something that we're going to need to be thinking about as we get into this concept of fractional ownership. As it relates to the blockchain itself, AI has the ability to enhance the efficiency and the effectiveness of the blockchain. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but just know that the technologies support each other in helping each other be more efficient and more effective in a lot of different ways. Federated learning, which again gets back to what I talked about a little bit earlier, which is where we are decentralizing the machine learning that is occurring. So we're able to have data that exists, for instance, in the blockchain on multiple nodes throughout the world. We can take that data and we can build models on that data in a privacy-preserving way to still get to better outcomes than what we would have been able to do if we didn't have the blockchain before, or if we didn't have the data in a central repository, which is kind of how we're doing things today. Automated machine learning and augmented discovery. This is another thing that I think is on the horizon for our space. And when we're talking about AutoML, we're sort of talking about how can we make the machine learning techniques become more autonomous, possibly completely autonomous, and not involve someone like a data scientist, somebody like me, in figuring out what data actually works. The example that I give most often is in the context of, so for instance, let's talk about an automated valuation model. So I may have 1,000 features about a property in a database system. And in the traditional data mining context or knowledge discovery process, I, as the data scientist, have to go in and I have to say, what features matter to the price of a property? And then I have to analyze that data and then come up with some outcome. But how do I know what features matter? I mean, I can take a guess. I can speak with real estate professionals that are doing this on a daily basis, and they can say, well, in this market, definitely bedrooms and bathrooms and square footage and lot size and all of these things really matter. Well, what about the view? Maybe the view matters more in a particular market than it does somewhere else. That's going to be extremely difficult for us to quantify as a whole. At the individual local level, maybe we do a good job at that, but at the whole, we're not going to be able to do a good job at that. So what we want to do is we want to really think about how these technologies, like artificial intelligence and machine learning, how we can leverage them to make our jobs better. So for instance, as a data scientist, letting the machine decide what features of the property actually matter in particular local markets. That's where we need to get to and get away from an individual sitting there and making decisions about what is and is not important, because the machine just does that better than I can. It's impossible for me to do that, okay? And then last but not least, algorithm marketplaces. We're going to start seeing things where I am an institution like Google, for instance, and I have access to a whole lot of data. I can build models on that data that then you, as a business, or maybe even a consumer, if that is the context, maybe I can just buy that algorithm from Google or from whatever organization has that data and not have to deal with how do I find the data, how do I figure out what data is important, and so forth and so on. We let the organizations with the data build the models, and that is the value proposition that they provide to us. So there's an algorithm marketplace. We're able to pick and choose what models we want to use, and we can apply them in our own businesses and not have to go through the process of dealing with finding the data, building the models, and so forth and so on. This is already happening. I know a lot of people in Chicago that are building businesses to try to make this happen for folks, because folks have such a difficult time building models on data, and there are a lot of organizations that do this really well. So algorithm marketplaces, I think, from the perspective of real estate, we're going to start to see a little bit more and more of those. Maybe it starts off with automated valuation models and getting that in the hands of folks that need them, but it can go even far beyond that as well. And I think that's going to be an interesting outcome for the future of real estate. So what are the kind of key things that I want you to take away from this conversation? First and foremost, these technologies are definitely very difficult to understand and to deal with. It's difficult for me, it's difficult for Mark, it's difficult for anyone, and if they tell you otherwise, they're probably lying. But what we can do is we can sit down and we can really try to understand, as domain experts, we know the domain, we know real estate. How can we understand these technologies in such a way that we can really start to pick apart the implications of these technologies in our business, okay? That doesn't require an in-depth understanding of AI, an in-depth understanding of blockchains and how they operate. You don't have to set one up, but you at least need to start thinking about the implications. What are the educational implications, for instance? What are the productivity implications? What are the legal implications? In a machine learning context, if I'm an organization and I'm leveraging artificial intelligence or machine learning to make a prediction about whether or not somebody is going to repay a loan and thus extend credit, if I use a variable like race, that probably isn't going to go over well with some of our regulatory bodies. But what if I use a variable that's correlated to race? I'm not directly using race, but I'm using something else that's correlated to race. Is that a problem? Okay, well, those are some interesting questions that people need to start thinking about. They need to start quantifying, and they need to start addressing those implications. So that's really where I would start. Following trends in emerging technology in general. whether it's artificial intelligence, blockchain, or something else. Today it's AI, today it's blockchain, tomorrow it might be something different that we're not even thinking about. So we have to really sit down and educate ourselves and try to stay connected with different trends and emerging technology, stay focused, and understand how these technologies can potentially impact our business and what we could potentially do about that. Attend webinars and other things like this. This is exactly what I would be doing. This is exactly what I do. I speak at conferences, but I also attend conferences, so I can understand what's going on in different areas of the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be just real estate, because other people may be innovating faster than the real estate industry is innovating. So we need to think about what's going on in other industries and how that could potentially be applied in our own. And last but not least, where possible, try some of these technologies. You know, we didn't really talk about it today with augmented reality and virtual reality and things like that, and how AI and augmented reality can come together to enhance the selling of a property by giving people a view of the property that they may not even see. But we have to see if there are organizations out there that are doing some of this stuff. Okay, they're building out solutions. Mark named a few that are building out blockchains, some that are doing this in the real estate market. Is there something that you can tap into? Is there an application that someone has built that you can get a trial for and that you can interact with and you can play around with and you can see, well, does this enhance my productivity? Does this really have any implications for what I'm doing? So try to really leverage these technologies as best as possible when they are available and they're available to you to integrate in your business. So the last thing that I want to say, and then I'll hand it off to, I guess, a couple of questions before lunch, is a lot of people are afraid of AI. A lot of people now are starting to become afraid of blockchain and cryptocurrency. But what I would like to do, and what I think you should do, this is what I try to accomplish, is how do I employ these technologies, this emerging technology, whether it's blockchain or AI, to help me do business better and faster than I would be able to do otherwise. Think about AI and the work of the data scientist. I mentioned it's impossible for me to go through and decide with each and every single problem what data is going to be valuable for me in the problem that I'm looking for. I know that I cannot do that as well as a machine. A machine can do it faster than I can and better than I can. Does that mean I'm out of business? Well, not really. That means that I, as a data scientist, can use that technology to make my job more efficient, my job more effective, and I can focus in on the more higher value items that my job provides. And that's where I think we all should be thinking about this type of technology. That's all I have. Thank you very much. Yes? So that was not, so the question, do you want to give him the mic? Sorry, say the question one more time for the group.
Okay, you said in the beginning of the presentation that you applied AI and neural networks to, and just the images from the MLS to evaluate property values in San Jose and Rochester, New York. Would ever get 5% and 10% accuracy. Mm-hmm. Is that true? You use none of the underlying property data for that evaluation?
So two things. One, I would really love to take credit for that research, but that wasn't me, unfortunately. Okay. So that was a couple of researchers, I believe, that were out of Columbia. And in their paper, they describe building a neural network that leveraged data from images alone to make property price predictions. So that tells me that they had no other data that they used in the model.
Okay. Follow-on question is, have anybody applied this algorithm or method to vacant land to reach evaluation?
That's an interesting question. From a computer vision perspective and leveraging neural networks, just looking at vacant land to come up with a property prediction, I have not seen any research that would indicate that folks are actually looking at this. But I know it's starting to be done in a commercial context. So folks are looking at multifamily properties and things like that to really try to derive value. Unfortunately, from the perspective of land, I haven't seen anything. That doesn't mean that it's not being done. I just haven't seen any research that talks about it. Yes, sir. 1 second.
How big sampling was it based on in San Jose? I mean, 100 units, 1,000 or 5,000?
So I know it was in the thousands.
Oh, and should have some accuracy then.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier about nodes and privacy. Are you guys actually integrating master nodes into any of this business that you guys are doing?
So, not anything that I'm doing at NAR, but I don't know, Mark, if you want to talk about the integration at all. I don't think there's anything that I can point to that would indicate that that's something that we're looking at, but I can definitely take that back and see if we're making any progress along those lines. Okay, I don't want to stand between you and lunch, so I'll be here for a couple of more hours. We still have the talk, so I'll hand it over to. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you. We can see actually a bright future, and there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know about all of you guys, but I need a mental break after all this information that we have. So we're going to take a break for now. There's lunch box in the back of the room. Go ahead and grab it. And please stop by the our sponsor booth. They're going to have prizes for the end of the day and enter to win. Thank you.